We start with the story of the week for the Federal Reserve, with Chair Jay Powell reacting forcefully to a grand jury subpoena looking into his testimony about renovations in the Fed's D.C. office building.
The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president. Public service sometimes requires standing firm in the face of threats. I will continue to do the job the Senate confirmed me to do, with integrity and a commitment to serving the American people.
Everyone from central bankers around the world to several Republican senators condemned the move, including senior Senate Banking Committee member Tom Tillis, who spoke with Bloomberg on Capitol Hill.
If suddenly the threat of a lawsuit can take a chair out of play, how can anybody think that that's anything more than a de facto ending the independence of the Fed? And we all know what that does to markets worldwide. I will block any effort to name any member of the Fed board until this matter is resolved. To move on would almost validate that this is a way that you can actually get the Fed under heel.
Bill Dudley is former president of the New York Fed and now a Bloomberg contributor. There was a lot of reaction to the news that there was a grand jury subpoena against the Federal Reserve and Chair Powell. A lot of reaction by politicians, by the news media. There wasn't as much reaction actually in the markets. So is one of them right and one of them wrong?
Well, time will tell. But I think the market view is, look, they issued a subpoena. It's a long way from issuing a subpoena to actually having the grand jury indictment, a trial. and that's going to take so long. Powell is already no longer going to be chair. So I think the market view is this is sort of a lot of noise.
So it may not have the effects in the real world, but Chair Powell, who had repeatedly just sloughed off criticism of the White House, had an entirely different reaction. It was a very, I thought, forceful statement that he taped.
Oh, very much so. And the contrast with how he behaved previously, where he was basically, I'm not going to engage, I'm not going to engage. And this time he said, no, you crossed the line. You're accusing me of malfeasance, and I'm not going to take it. And so I think because he was so measured before, this made it even more effective.
So when you've been in the room, and whenever we ask somebody who's on the Fed, they say, oh, no, we pay no attention to politics at all. Absolutely not. It doesn't affect us. But you are human beings. I mean, it must play in the back of your mind somewhere, even if it's not discussed in the meeting.
Look at the Federal Reserve transcripts of all the FOMC meetings released with a lag of 5 years, and you won't see any discussion about political considerations. So I think that's actually true. But you're certainly right in the sense that if the administration is putting tremendous pressure on the Fed to do something, that makes it a little bit more difficult for the Fed to deliver what the administration actually wants, because it creates the idea of are they doing it because they think this is appropriate for the economy, or are they caving to the administration's pressure? So I think that's why it's actually counterproductive what they're doing. I can imagine Powell thinking, should I do one more rate cut or not? Boy, now if I do a rate cut, it looks like I'm bending to this pressure. Maybe I better hold off. So it's actually making it more difficult for the Fed to cut rates, frankly.
As you say, Chair Powell's term will be up in May. There will be a new Fed chair. How much difference will the chair make in and of himself?
I think the chair is certainly important because, one, they control the agenda. The Board of Governors staff works mainly for the chairman. So that's a lot of authority. But at the end of the day, in terms of the votes on the Federal Open Market Committee, the chair only has one vote. And so I think the influence of the chair really depends in part on how credible that person is in terms of making the case for the monetary policy that he wants to see implemented. So if someone comes in and says we should cut 100 basis points and the economy doesn't suggest that that's appropriate, the committee is going to say, well, that's what you think, but we're going to dissent against that. And that's really, that would actually be quite bad for the chairman if the chairman sort of lost a vote to the rest of the committee. So I think there's quite a few guardrails there. I think the broader question is, can the Trump administration put enough loyalists into the Federal Reserve so it's not just the chairman, it's a majority of voting members of the Federal Open Market Committee. And that's why the Lisa Cook case is so important. Because if Lisa Cook can be dismissed for cause, well, then maybe other people can be dismissed for cause, and then you get a much more rapid turnover of the Board of Governors. Board of Governors has 7 votes on the FOMC. The presidents have 5. So if you could take over the Board of Governors, you could actually start to get the monetary policy you wanted.
From the outside, the job of chair of the Federal Reserve looks pretty hard for anyone, anytime. Is President Trump making it harder for the next chair with what he's saying and doing, including his grand jury subpoena?
Yeah, I think he is, because I think it's when the new chair comes in, people are going to be wondering, so are you President Trump's lackey, or are you going to be on the side of independent monetary policy based on what the economy calls for in terms of inflation and employment? What interest rate path should we follow? And so there's going to be a question about, are you supporting the idea of an independent central bank or not? And so the new incoming chair is caught in a very difficult place, frankly. I mean, it's almost like they're going to get someone mad at them if they side on the side of let's independence of monetary policy, let's set the right monetary policy. That might run into conflict with the president. And obviously, if he tries to push the president's agenda and the FOMC thinks that's inappropriate, then he's going to get on the wrong side of the FOMC. So I wouldn't want to be the new chair, frankly.
It strikes me when it comes to the Supreme Court, the president typically goes out of his way to say, I didn't ask, for example, how they would vote on this particular issue. I didn't ask that question in advance. I'm not sure President Trump would have the same reticence with the next Fed chair of not asking them specifically, what are you going to do?
I wouldn't be surprised if he asked them what to do. And I think if I was the Fed chair, I'd say it depends on the incoming economic data and what's warranted to keep the economy on a smooth glide path. I mean, look, I think President Trump, is coming at it from a real estate developer perspective, and which is lower rates are always good. But the reality is lower rates aren't always good, because if you set rates too low, the economy will overheat and you'll have an inflation problem. It's sort of ironic in an environment where people are worried about affordability, that inflation is the thing that really resonates with voters, that you're pressing so hard for lower interest rates, which would actually probably make inflation worse.
President Trump has said repeatedly, I have the right to express my views. I think I'm pretty smart on this, and there is a First Amendment right, even for the President of the United States, express your views. Is there a point where that expression of views actually starts to do long-term damage to the institution?
I think it depends on how you're expressing the point of view. You could say, my view is that the Federal Reserve should interest rates more. Fine, that's just an impression of view. Powell is an idiot. He better lower interest rates by 100 basis points or I'll fire him. That's a totally different expression of a point of view. One is saying what I think interest rates should be. The other is saying, not only is what do I think interest rates should be, this should be the consequence of my decision. So I think there are two different things. So I don't think anyone quarrels with the president having a view on interest rates.
The latter is what the president has done.
Yes.
Which would imply there is some damage being done. How long lasting is that? I mean, there will be a new president at some point, and let's assume the new president comes in and says, no, I'm not going to criticize the Fed anymore. Does it restore the credibility, or is there lingering damage?
I mean, I think it depends on how the Federal Reserve behaves over the next couple of years. If the Federal Reserve basically sticks to its knitting, conducts monetary policy in an independent way, keeps the economy on a smooth trajectory, no lasting damage. The President Trump was thwarted in his attempts to take over the Fed. But if President Trump is somehow successful in taking over the Fed and getting a very accommodative monetary policy as a consequence that's not appropriate for the economic outlook, then of course there'll be more lasting damage to the Fed.
Take us inside the room when the FOMC meets, because historically it's sort of been like secret. We don't know what's going on.
Well, you have the transcripts, and I think the transcripts are pretty accurate about what the meetings are like. Basically what happens at a meeting is typically you have a briefing from the system open account manager about what's going on in markets. Then you have a briefing on the economy from the staff, and then a briefing on international staff. And then you have a go around, and everyone talks about their views on the economic outlook. It's a pretty collegial place. I mean, if people want to understand the views of others. People aren't yelling and screaming and arguing, vociferously. It's very respectful, and people spend quite a bit of time, when the meeting's not in place, actually, talking in the halls at coffee, having a cup of coffee on the break, or at the breakfast or lunch. So I would say, I find it to be quite collegial, I think that makes the institution function better.
A collegial place where one in Lisa Cook and now two in the chair, Jay Powell, are under very public attack, a
And
personal attack.
And I think people are feeling they're, that could be me. So I think, there's quite a bit of sympathy for what those two people are going through. So I think, I think the Federal Reserve leadership, including all the FOMC participants, are are very sympathetic to where Powell's coming from, and I think they feel really good about what he did and had to say in his video message this past weekend.